Hello, everyone, and welcome into the latest edition of our Coaching Network podcast series. I'm John Brice of footballscoop.com. Pleased to be joined today by University of Houston special teams coordinator Mike Krysl. Mike, welcome to the show. Appreciate you taking some time out of vacation to visit with us.
No, I appreciate you guys having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, we'll dive right in. I've been studying up on you this summer. I know you were recently promoted to special teams coordinator at Houston. You've got an interesting backstory. You're now working for the guy you played college football for, and Willie Fritz. What's that relationship like, and how neat is it to have gone from player to somewhat of a colleague with your former head coach?
It kind of started, I guess it was back in, my senior class would have been graduating, would have been after the 2010 season. So coach, leaves Central Missouri and takes the head job at Sam Houston. Well, at that point, I had some things happen to where I guess you could say my playing days got cut short. So he kept me on as a student assistant doing whatever needed to be done, video, equipment, odds and ends, whatever needed to be done. So then when he got the job at Sam Houston, I kind of, he knew I wanted to get into coaching, and he was honest with me. He said, hey, the graduate assistant package at Sam Houston right now is not the greatest. If you were to come down here and get your master's degree in 2 years, you probably leave here $25,000 in debt, just because it's not great right now. It's not where it needs to be. So long story short, the guy that recruited the St. Louis area for Coach Fritz out of high school was a guy named Chuck Clemens. So Chuck stuck around and stayed at UCM for the new head coach, Jim Sabota. So Chuck kind of got me on as a graduate assistant, which worked out great, being a graduate assistant at your alma mater. So I was a D-line GA my first year. Then I was an O-line GA my second year. So fast forward, your time as a graduate assistant's winding down. 6 months from now, you're going to start getting your student loan payment. So I kind of panicked because it's hard. I mean, I would tell people this till the day. Like it's hard to get a full-time coaching job coming from just being a GA at a D2 school. Like it's hard. That's why a lot of guys, you might GA, like a good friend of mine who's the OC at Pittsburgh State right now. He did it the way everybody used to do it. He GA'd at Central Missouri. He got to GA at Central Missouri. He went and GA'd at a bigger school. He went and GA'd at Iowa State. His dad was the O-line, so I panicked a little bit. I took a high school coaching job at Lexington High School, which is just outside of Kansas City, about 30 minutes from Warrensburg. I took that job. I was the offensive coordinator, offensive line coach, and I was teaching middle school history, I believe is what I was teaching at the time. And it just was not a great fit. I had come from being a graduate assistant for 2 years to seeing kind of how college football worked. And then to be thrown into that world was it was different. It was different. So anyway, so I did that for a season, and then ended up going to West Virginia State, a little bitty D2 school just outside of Charleston. Went there as the offensive line coach, strength and conditioning coach. D2 school, you got to do got to wear all kinds of different hats. So I did that for a season. And then I guess it was late. It was really late. So I think coach gets the job at Georgia Southern, goes through the first spring. I think probably realizes, first FBS job, I can't maybe do this the way I have in the past. So he calls me and said, hey, you want to come down and, help me run the kicking game? I'm like, sure. And nowadays it doesn't matter, but back then you had all kinds of weird titles and whatever.
Right.
So I did that for 2 years. Then he gets the job at Tulane. I'm like, okay, I kind of want to go out and do this on my own, see if I can do it. So he gets the job at Tulane after our first 2 years at Georgia Southern. Well, I go to Samford University, work for a guy named Chris Hatcher. It was a great experience for me because not only did I get a chance to go out and do it on my own, but I got to go out and do it for a head coach that is calling the offense, which anybody knows what that's like. you've got a lot of freedom and autonomy to do whatever you want, but at the same time, because he's not breathing down your neck all the time, like you kind of had to put it on yourself to make sure, like, hey, this is simple, this is sound. There's going to be no blowback from anybody, because there was a lot of times where he was meeting with the offense all day. And when he wasn't meeting with the offense, he was meeting with the defensive script practice. So it was good from that sense. So I did that for 2 years for Hatch, 2016, 2017. After my second year there, I got a call from Jeff Monken, who
Yeah.
Monk wanted me to come up. I had a really good buddy of mine who was the safeties coach for Army at the time. We GA'd together. We played for Coach Fritz together. His name's Josh Christian Young. He's actually on our staff right now. He's our safeties coach. So he kind of calls me and says, hey, Coach Monk, wants to hire a special teams coordinator. Would you be interested? I had some other stuff going at the time,
Yeah.
but ended up going up there, interviewing, getting the job. Great. Did that for 2 years. Had an opportunity to go to Arkansas with Coach Fritz's college roommate, who's the head coach there. So that was kind of my in. Everybody's, getting the SEC, get it on your resume. So I went there for 2 years with Pittman, and the coordinator at the time was a guy named Scott Fountain. And then I went back to Sanford for another year in 2022 with Hatch, which I think Hatch kind of, knock on wood, you hope it don't have to happen. But every time I go back, every time I've been at Sanford, we found a way to make the playoffs. So I did that for 1 year. And then after the 22 season, which we had a great year, probably one of the best ones Chris has had there. I think we made it to the quarterfinals. I think we lost to North Dakota State in the playoffs. But so I went back to Tulane. I say back. I never really worked there the first time, but I went back to Tulane in 23 to work with Greg McMahon. And it was a great experience. And then we had a great year. Coach gets the job in Houston, kind of happened at the snap of a finger. And now here we are living in Houston, but it's been great. So I guess to answer your question, I mean, if you count being a student assistant, this will be the fourth place I've worked for them. I think the advantage that I have that other guys on our staff might have, like Coach CY, Derek Sherman, we've all kind of worked with him before, and he taught us all how to do it when we were young. So I think the benefit for him is he's got a bunch of guys that know how he wants things done, kind of know what his expectations are. And it's been good. There is no question about that.
You referenced three guys there that I think a lot of and I've gotten to know through the years. And Monk allowed me to come up in 21 and embed with the team the night before the Army-Navy game at MetLife Stadium. Went through all team meetings and everything. So that was really cool. I've known Hatch for several years. I'm from the South, so I know a lot of SoCon football. I remember that 22 Sanford team. You guys were really good in the SoCon and kept it going in the playoffs. That's awesome. And then I'm old enough to have covered Pittman in my SEC days when he was the O-line coach at Tennessee, and got to know him and still have some friends out there at Arkansas. So that's three really good influences there in addition to Coach Fritz. So that's really neat. I've got to ask you, what position did you play when you were playing before injuries cut you short? Because
I played running back in high school. Obviously got to college and was not going to play running back from an athleticism standpoint. So I got
come
moved.
on.
I know. I'm just being honest. So I got moved to fullback.
Okay.
We were still kind of the guy that was our offensive coordinator at the time was a real good friend of Coach Fritz, is still to this day. And he was a, pro style guy. So we had a tight end in the game, sometimes two. We played with a fullback. So went there as a quote unquote running back out of high school, but then quickly got moved over to fullback once I got there. So, but yeah, I did not. And it was good. It was a good experience there. And then, like I said, with the injuries, I mean, it got cut short, but it was, I think, more beneficial for me playing those 2 or 3 years was the experience as a student assistant, especially at that level, seeing kind of getting an idea of the whole living the adage, nobody's too good to dig a ditch. You might have to change the laundry one day, might have to help paint the field the next day, but it was definitely good for sure.
You're leading me into my next question again. We're joined today on the Our Coaching Network podcast by Mike Krysl, the special teams coordinator at the University of Houston. I'm John Brice of Football Scoop. And Mike, you did just guide me directly into my next question, and that is, you talked about being a GA on both sides of football, offensive and defensive GA, and then you just referenced your student coaching days. How much of those experiences formed who you are today, and how much do they help you relate to the current student athletes, because you've lived it, you've had a hard path, and you can relay that to them?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is too is just not, and I'm probably going to hurt some feelings when I say this, but we've all kind of worked places where you might feel like there's one or two guys in the building that, I don't know how to say this, they might think a certain task, I guess, is not
Not part
falls
of their job description.
falls under their additional duties assigned by the head coach. But I think that's, a big thing with that is the working at those levels, working for Andy Learman at Lexington High School, for example, who now, I think those guys, and I've thought this for the longest time, some of the best coaches I've ever worked with were guys at that smaller school level, guys at that high school level. Because I think what those guys got a really good idea of is I think they do a good job out of getting as much as they possibly can out of the littlest resources imaginable, whether that be an athleticism standpoint of who's on their team, whether that be a budget issue, whatever it may be. Like those guys, like Andy, to this day, I keep talking about Andy Learman, like he's a guy, every time something comes up that I might have a question on, he's one of the first people I think, well, if I can't figure this out, I'm going to call Andy and see, because that world that those guys live in, like they've dealt with some type of controversy at some point when it comes to making ends meet financially, or, all that kind of stuff from whatever different avenue you want to attack it. I mean, I think those guys, but that has, as far as how it shaped me, I think it's made me probably, and there's a lot of guys in our building that are like that, because that's the guys that Coach Fritz likes having around, is those guys that have played for him in the past. They've got D2 experience, they've got JUCO experience. But I think we've got a building full of guys, coaches especially, that are just kind of whatever you need, kind of all hands on deck. Like we've got an official visit weekend, and hey, you might not have anything in your title that has to do with on-campus recruiting, but if something needs to be done, if there's a spill that needs to be cleaned, like everybody's kind of all hands on deck and does their part. And nobody, I guess we got a bunch of guys here that are not too good to dig a ditch, I guess is one way to say it. But that's definitely helped me. I would like to think it has anyway. There's some people might feel different, but I hope that's something.
So we'll flash back to a few years ago, and you said you were at West Virginia State. You get the call from Coach Fritz to come down to Statesboro, Georgia, and help at Georgia Southern. What did you know about kicking before? You just told us you were a running back and a fullback, and then you ended up GAing on both lines, both sides of the ball. So what did you know about kicking a football that made Willie Fritz put you down there?
I think and that's kind of a misconception that, it's like everybody that's a special teams coach was a specialist. I would say that the guys I've met over the years is probably the complete opposite, where they're not really a specialist. They've never been a specialist. They were tight end or whatever. But I think, kind of a funny story is like, so he asked me to come down to Georgia Southern. I'm like, okay, I didn't fake it, but I didn't know a ton about special teams at the time. Now, I will say that I give all the credit. Everything I know was taught to me by Willie Fritz. Like now I've gone and I've worked for Monk and Hatcher and some other guys, and, you tweak some things here and there, but my base knowledge of everything I know when it comes to the kicking game is 100% accredited to Coach Fritz. Like that's no doubt. Everybody knows that. But so first game at Georgia Southern, we're playing NC State and we're punting. They run a wall return. Well, at this time, I'm still kind of just getting my bearings straight, making sure we got 11 guys out there. Well, he comes by me on the side. I think, like, did you see that? Did you see that? They, like they ran a wall return. Well, I had no idea what a wall return was. I'm like, no idea. I'm like, yeah, coach, I saw it. We'll get it fixed. But it was, I guess it's the way he kind of teaches you, because he's had some guys that are kind of his kicking game guy, like there's a bunch of us. There's, Robbie Disher at Illinois,
Yeah.
Chris Couch at Florida. Like we're all kind of in the same tree. But I think the way he kind of does it, and it's not trying to think of the word. It's not like he's trying to sabotage anything, but like you learn it on your own. Like, hey, this figure it out, and that's kind of how I did. I mean, there's that first summer in Statesboro, Georgia. I mean, I bet I sat there and looked at the first two opponents we were playing that year for probably 2 months. That's all I did because I was an O-line guy. I played fullback. I mean, I had a knowledge but I didn't know. I guess the best way for me to say, I didn't know how much goes into it before you actually sit down and do it, and it's something he taught me too about being a special teams guy is, if you're organized, that is going to be half the battle. And I feel that way. I've worked for other head coaches, Chris Hatcher, one of the most organized dudes I've ever been around. Like he's the same, but in that phase of the game, I feel like if it's organized, if the practice periods are organized, if the meetings are organized, I think it's going to be a lot less stressful for the kids, and they're going to be a lot more apt to be gung-ho about playing on special teams, about playing on the punt team, because they know what they're going to get every day. It's consistent. It's not so much to them on top of what they have to do offensively and defensively that it just stresses them out so much that they just shut down. But that's another thing I've learned from him too, is how to keep it simple, how to keep things organized, and how to make meetings and practice flow. And a lot of the things I do, I mean, it's a guy, keep giving him a lot of credit, but I mean, something he tries to teach all of us young coaches is, how do males learn? Well, males are visual learners, 12 to 15 minutes is, time span that, they're going to keep attention. So it's all stuff that we, my wife's in education too. And I'll be putting together a PowerPoint every now and then, and she'll see it and make a comment. I'm like, well, he wants the stuff in color because that's how males learn. It's good stuff, but he really kind of coaches everybody in the building, never micromanages you. I would not even close to say he micromanages you, but he doesn't have to, I guess is my point, because he's already kind of put down a clear line of expectation. Like, hey, this is how I want things done. So he doesn't have, he knows you're going to get it done the way he wants it done.
Some interesting insight there. And what I also picked up is that there are a couple of coaches there in the Krysl household, it sounds like, with your wife helping out there on the PowerPoints.
Yes.
I like that. We are joined once again on the Our Coaching Network podcast by Mike Krysl, Houston Special Teams Coordinator. I'm John Brice of Football Scoop. Mike, we don't want to keep you too much longer. You've given us a lot of background. You've given us a lot of the experiences that shape you. Now, how do you get the mentality out of your players that you want? What is your special teams philosophy in general, big picture? I know Marty Biaggi at Notre Dame, I've gotten to know through the years, all of his special teams guy wear a tap the hat bracelet, and it's just sort of mentality that they bring to the field. So what kind of mentality do you impart on your players, and how do you get that to translate to the field?
Yeah, that's a good question. I had a buddy of mine who he just became a special teams guy about 2 months ago, and he flew in town and spent 2 or 3 days with me. And, one of the questions he asked me is, he's like, what's your thing? And I'm like, what do you mean? What's my thing? He goes like, well, what's your, like every special teams guy I've talked to kind of has this, like, we had one at Arkansas, for example, that sticks out on top of my head. And I was like, we really don't have one. He goes, oh, well, how do you like stress the importance of it and this, that, and the other? And I'm like, well, it's kind of easy. I'm sure, you've got some knowledge of Coach Fritz, but like everywhere in our building, there's this what we call the plan to win. That's 4, 5 cornerstones of, hey, we feel like if we do these things the right way, we're at least going to give ourselves a chance to win the game. And, it's control the running game, eliminate pre-snap, post-play penalties, finish, win the fourth quarter. But my point, like one of them is like the bullet point, number 3 is great special forces, win the kicking game. Like that is something that do we have a saying at the end of the meeting that everybody breaks down? And no, I mean, we don't have something where it's, I don't, whatever
Yeah.
example I'm sure you've heard, but like our thing, do our kids know it's important? Yeah. I mean, do our kids know it's important? Because, the head coach is very involved in it, which is great. I mean, some guys ask me like, well, how is that? How is that having the head coach involved? And it's like, well, I don't have a problem with it because by him being involved, it tells all the kids just how important it is to begin with, but as far as that, to answer your question, do we have a motto? Do we have a saying? No, we don't. But I think our kids around here, the kids at Tulane, the kids he had at Georgia Southern, wherever he's been, they understand the importance of it just because it's part of the plan to win. I mean, the plan to win, that's something we go over at least once a day during fall camp. We go over Friday night in the hotel. I mean, that's our blueprint to where if somebody said, hey, how has over the past 20 something years, the guy's been a head coach, how has he won? I would say, just look at the plan to win. That's what we follow, so thought
Yeah.
about it, but no, I've been asked that question before. We don't have one. I know that's probably sounds crazy now that I say we don't because everybody else does, but that ain't how we do it.
No, you reference it there. You've got one by default, really, in the plan
Right.
to win, and you've got authenticity that stretches from the head coach all the way down. Like you said, they see it. They don't have to have a phrase because they see it evidenced every single day that they're in the complex.
And on top of him, we've got all of our coaches are involved in the kicking game, and they all do a phenomenal job. Like, there's your obvious ones that you try to keep out of certain situations, like Iman, for example, our O-line coach. Like, is Iman going to help me on PAT field goal? Yes. Like, but that's it. There's no reason for, and this is how everybody does it, just so you know. I know you know this, but like, if you go down the road to Baylor or Texas Tech I mean, their O-line coach isn't out there coaching on the punt team. I mean, that's 10, 15 minutes individual they can have. But, as far as, Coach CY, Coach Etheridge, Coach Sherman, Coach Joseph, all our position coaches outside of the line coaches and our coordinator, they all help coach in the kicking game. So that's the other thing too, where it's not like it's just me and coach up there doing it. I mean, we watch punt period from a Tuesday practice on a Wednesday. Everybody on that punt team is sitting with their position coach. Like they're getting position specific coaching, just like you would on offense and defense, which I think is huge,
Absolutely. Close to wrapping up here, and a couple of more big picture questions. I guess about 12 years ago, you were at Lexington High School coaching at the prep level. Now you're preparing to enter the 2024 football season as a power conference special teams coordinator. Maybe you even haven't even had time to take a moment and reflect on that journey. But as I ask you about it now, what is it like to reflect on that journey, to think all the places you've been in the last dozen years to where now you're headed into the 24 football season again as a special teams coordinator at the University of Houston, a Big 12 member, and just a magical season of college football ahead that we've never seen before?
Yeah, I think I'm looking forward to it. Again, I think I know something that helps me going into it. I know it's a new role, but it is, but it's not. I mean, I know what the guy wants. I know how he wants things done. I know that if I go in there and do things, if I ever ask myself, okay, how would he want this done? Like there's some freedom for me to be able to handle situations as they come up because I guess I know what the answers to those questions are already, if that makes sense. Like I'm not ever going to go into something or a situation that, haven't handled before, haven't encountered before. But it's still, I mean, at the end of the day, it's, and it's funny you ask. You always hear this kind of people say it in movies and it sounds cliche, but like, whether you're at Houston as the special teams coordinator, or you're at Army or Sanford or Georgia Southern or Arkansas, I mean, at the end of the day, is once the game kicks off, it's the same thing. There might be a few more people in the stands, but other than that, it's, technique, fundamentals, who can block better, who can tackle better, and who can hang on to the ball. And at the end of the day, if you can do those things, you'll have some success no matter what level you're on.
Awesome, Mike. It's been a great visit with you. I really appreciate your time again. You're running out of vacation days. I guess that doesn't the dead period lift around July 24 or so, and
Right.
we're recording this on Sunday the 15th or something like that. So, Mike Krysl, University of Houston special teams coordinator. Thanks for joining us today on the Our Coaching Network podcast.
Thank you for having me, guys. Appreciate it.